Well, this morning I am incredibly excited because I have owned this Celestron Edge 8-inch for nearly a decade, but I've barely used it. In all the time I've had it, I've barely used it, particularly for imaging. I've used it more for visual. And the reason is because I tried many years ago to put a DSLR camera on the back of it, taking darks. It just got too complicated. I wasn't happy with the results I was getting from a DSLR camera, and I sort of gave up. And after a little bit of research, what I realized was it was going to take some money to get this to the standard that I wanted to get it to. But I finally made the leap today and bought the gear that I need to be able to get this on its feet. It's not going to be long before I get this Edge up and running for imaging, and I'm really excited about that. For a start, with the focal reducer on the back, it opens up roughly a focal length of 1400 millimeters, which is quite a long focal length, and it will open up lots of different kinds of targets that I can't take with my other scopes, particularly in terms of galaxies and planetary nebula. Now, I ran into a couple of problems in terms of being able to get this scope up and running over the years. The first problem was getting a really good focuser, and I know many people out there very successfully replace the stock focuser and put something like a ZWO EAF on there or similar, and they quite happily focus with it. I didn't want to go that route because it means that you can't use these brilliant mirror locks, and I wanted to keep the mirror completely flat. So what the mirror locks actually do is they clamp the mirror firmly in place. On screen I've got a little bit of a diagram of how a typical SCT works, and you want that mirror completely fixed and firm, and these locks do that. Without these locks, you're open to a little bit of mirror slippage, even with a focuser on the main focus of the draw tube, of the primary focuser. And so what you get is a little bit of mirror flop as the telescope moves throughout the night. Now, it's not much movement. We're talking like tiny amounts, but it can put your scope out of focus quite quickly, and you're having to then endlessly refocus with a standard focuser. So that was problem one, that I just wanted a really good focuser, and that involved putting a focuser here on the actual reducer, the 0.7 reducer, rather than on the stock focuser, because then the focuser can work directly from this system and you can lock your mirrors off. The second issue that I encountered was that actually I didn't want to be moving all of my gear across into this rig from other rigs. I didn't want to be moving the Eagle across and then all of the wiring, and I just wanted a system that you can just get out, get on the telescope and get moving with. And so that brings me to the third reason, and that is price, because you start to kind of realize if you need a good focuser and you need to have equipment on here that you're not moving around and you're treating it as a completely separate rig, you burn through money, and some of that money can be incredibly quick to go through. Just as an example, I just bought a clamp the other day to put my old Eagle version 2 on the top of this. Well, that clamp was £60. So you very quickly start to realize that actually this is quite expensive if you're going to do it properly. To all of you out there, and there's loads of you who've done this, way cheaper than what I'm doing, and maybe some of you are watching this kind of going, well, it's a bit lazy, Martin, to not move everything across, or just get an EAF focuser on the main focus knob and deal with it that way. Great, but I didn't want to compromise, and so I finally got to a stage where I've saved enough and got the right gear to turn this into a proper imaging rig. Well, what I'm going to do today is take you through the new gear that I bought, and that's the PrimaLuceLab ESATTO 2-inch low profile, and that primarily will fit onto this reducer, and then the camera housing can go on the back of that. So one of the first things to consider when you're doing a project like this is to actually work out what your back focus is. With this reducer on there, I believe that the back focus altogether is 105 millimeters. Now, again, I'm going to put a diagram on screen of how I worked all of this out with all of the various calculations so that you can visually see what I needed. The spacer being sort of 7 mils, I could have gone lower than that because you've got the actual focuser moving in and out. So there is some element of being able to get a rough gauge on that because the focuser will do the rest of the work. And the ESATTO focuser works by moving outwards up to 10 millimeters. So you've got a little bit of room for maneuver there. Now, one of the reasons I went with the ESATTO focuser is because it has a low profile, hence its name, because going with the full fat ESATTO, you don't have that kind of space. And in fact, I believe with the regular ESATTO, you can't quite reach proper focus on the edge. You have to go with a low profile to make it properly work. So let's get the camera focused on the back of this housing here of the edge, and I'll go through the installation process. The first job is to remove this stock adapter, which obviously is usually meant for just eyepieces. So we get rid of that just by unscrewing it. And then we want to put the reducer, which will reduce the image from 2000 millimeter focal length down to about 1400. Now, there's a reason that I wanted to stay with a reducer, and that is because imaging at 2000 millimeters, particularly in the UK, you're sort of asking for trouble in terms of good seeing conditions, whereas I think 1400 millimeters is just that little bit more forgiving. Well, the next job is to get this, don't know if you can see this that well, there we go, this PrimaLuceLab adapter, and you do need to, if you're doing a project like this, you do need to factor in these kinds of extra expenses, but this basically is going to screw onto the end of the reducer. Now, hopefully, I don't know if you can see this, but you can see hopefully these grooves, and you're basically going to clamp the low profile adapter into these grooves. Now, before we can take the next step of actually getting the ESATTO connected, we actually need some power to it. So in order to do that, I'm just going to take this old Losmandy plate, 240 millimeter, off my old Eagle, and we're just going to attach a new clamp, the one I was speaking about earlier, with small items like this that can really ramp up the costs of these kinds of projects. So there's the old clamp gone, and what we're going to do is fit this new clamp that will then clamp onto the Losmandy all kind of nice and neatly. So let's just have a look at those bolts. Probably good practice to put some new bolts in as well, nice and clean, nice clean ones. So we're just going to lightly screw those in, not fully tighten them down yet. Okay. So this Eagle is now all set and ready to clamp on to the Losmandy plate. Just loosen that a little bit more, and that's hopefully just going to live here permanently, which just solves one of the issues that I've had. And we've got the power ports all available at the back. Now, in order to get power to the ESATTO, we've got a 12 volt DC port right there. If you've got newer USB-C, then you can connect it there. This being an older Eagle, I think there is USB 3 on one side, but I'll probably have to test that later. So I'm just going to give it a power cord. And so we just plug one of these into the 3 amp, plug in the USB-C cable, and we've got a red light, so we do have some power. So we're now at the point where we're ready to actually install the ESATTO, and all we've got to do is just go to the PC, set the go point wide open, and click go, and you can hear hopefully the motors spinning. If I can just put that for the camera, you can see that opening up, and that's going to move the focuser as far out as you possibly can get. I don't know if you can see, just basically on these bits, you're going to attach grub screws in there to clamp onto there, and there's 3 of these points, 1, 2 and 3 there, and look, the focuser's almost all the way out now. In fact, it's clear enough for me to get the thing attached. Now, I put on a spacer there, because if I don't, then the off-axis guider is going to hit the focuser, so that's going to be no good. So I put that spacer on, and we are just going to screw the adapter in. There we go. And then finally screw it into the ESATTO. Okay, and that's the whole housing put together. I think we're all ready for testing there. So it'll be tightening up the mirror locks after we've got it into focus and seeing where we get. It was all going so well until it wasn't. We're several weeks on from the last part of this video, and I've got to report that it's been quite high stress getting this focusing solution to work. The key problem had been back focus, and whilst the focuser is now working, there's a serious design flaw in this piece of gear that needs to be overcome. Namely, the low profile design, which presumably had to spread out over a larger surface area to accommodate the focusing mechanism. But it means that you run into problems with spacers. In the first part of my video, I'd mentioned a 7.5mm spacer, but there's a problem. This doesn't physically allow enough space to attach an imaging train with the camera and the filter wheel and the off-axis guider, because the off-axis guider with the barrel roll actually hits this part of the focuser at 7.5mm. There's no actual physical way to screw onto the focuser. It's impossible to do. So I tried to see what the damage would be in terms of image quality with the wrong back focus, but there was no way this was going to work. I reached out to PrimaLuceLab and Player One, and I got a brief: you'll have to look for adapters from PrimaLuceLab. Player One have been fantastic all the way along, emailing me each day with photos and even videos to help me out. It turns out that you can remove the tilt plate on the Player One, which buys back 5mm of backspace. I've got to tell you, this is not for the faint-hearted, especially if you already have unmounted filters in place. The process involves removing the filter carousel, and I stupidly didn't pay enough attention to all the washers and bolts in the disassembly, and in fairness, some accidentally fell out on me as I was air blowing sort of the back of the housing, and I had to reopen the filter wheel housing on several occasions to fix this. But fix it we did, and I really do want to give a shout out to Player One for their brilliant support in helping me get the filter wheel working again properly. The updated back focus diagram is now on screen, and you can see where I've reduced the gap to the camera, which meant that I could add the 5mm to the original 7mm spacing to make it 13mm overall. Now, if you're willing to go through this process, the focuser works brilliantly, and I got a decent focus curve without any effort because the focuser moves in tiny increments. In fact, it's 0.03 microns to be exact in the step sizes, so the step sizes end up being absolutely huge. So this is a really easy focuser to dial in. I was also pleased with the quality of the stars in this 60-second exposure, and this one sub showed decent stars without engaging the mirror locks. Things got even better with a pass of Blur Exterminator. Unfortunately, we've reached a point in the year where we don't actually have enough full darkness or astronomical night here in the UK, so real imaging is going to have to wait until the end of the summer. But I'm now confident that I have a system ready to work. I'd like to see manufacturers, though, be as transparent as they can be on their sales pages. The ESATTO Low Profile design was primarily introduced for the 8-inch Edge telescope, and it almost doesn't work with a typical imaging train, if you want to use the reducer, that is. I have no complaints about the quality of the focusing or the capability of the ESATTO, but it may not pair well with your gear. And especially if you have a camera with a fixed 17.5mm system from the front of the camera to the imaging center, you might well be stuffed. Well, I can't wait to see what the system can do. That's it for this week. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you've enjoyed the journey of this. My name is Martin, and you've been watching Adventures in Astronomy. See you soon.